Hello and welcome to Cultural Apologists React for today, September 10th, 2024. This is an AI-generated podcast and can make mistakes. Use it for generating possible ideas, but don't rely on it as an authoritative guide to the day's news or to the details of cultural apologetics. Two leaders of a white supremacist group called the Terrorgram Collective have been charged with multiple crimes. Dallas Humber and Matthew Allison allegedly incited followers to commit hate crimes against various groups and encouraged attacks on government infrastructure. They created a list of high-profile targets for assassination, including a U.S. senator and judge, and produced instructions for making bombs and evading law enforcement. The group's activities have been linked to several violent incidents in the U.S. and abroad, and the two men are now facing 15 counts each of soliciting hate crimes and providing material support to terrorism. So how might we think about this story from the standpoint of cultural apologetics? Through the lens of William Edgar's Christian cultural apologetics, the story of the Terrorgram Collective reveals a stark illustration of the consequences of a worldview that fundamentally misunderstands the nature of creation, humanity, and community. In his book, Truth in All Its Glory, Edgar argues that truth is not merely a correspondence between language and reality, but is ultimately grounded in the character of God, Edgar. The Terrorgram Collective's ideology, with its emphasis on hatred, violence, and division, represents a grotesque distortion of this understanding. At its core, the collective's worldview is rooted in a flawed anthropology. Edgar notes that human beings are not autonomous, self-sufficient entities, but are instead created in the image of God, Edgar, created and creating. The Terrorgram Collective's ideology, however, posits that certain groups of people are inherently superior to others, denying the fundamental equality and dignity of all human beings. This twisted understanding of humanity leads inevitably to a devaluation of life and a justification for violence against those deemed inferior. The collective's actions also demonstrate a profound disregard for the concept of community. Edgar emphasizes that humanity is not a collection of isolated individuals, but a complex web of relationships. Edgar, created and creating. The Terrorgram Collective's emphasis on hatred and division, however, seeks to tear apart this web, creating an us versus them mentality that ultimately leads to chaos and destruction. Furthermore, the collective's ideology is characterized by a rejection of the created order. Edgar notes that creation is not merely a backdrop for human existence, but an integral part of God's plan for humanity. Edgar, Truth in All Its Glory. The Terrorgram Collective's actions, however, demonstrate a blatant disregard for this created order, seeking to impose their own twisted will on the world through violence and intimidation. The story also highlights the importance of Christian engagement with culture. Edgar argues that Christians are not called to be passive observers of cultural trends, but active participants in shaping the cultural narrative. Edgar, created and creating. The Terrorgram Collective's ideology represents a stark example of what can happen when Christians fail to engage with culture in a meaningful way, allowing twisted worldviews to fill the vacuum. Ultimately, the story of the Terrorgram Collective serves as a warning about the dangers of a worldview that rejects the fundamental principles of creation, humanity, and community. As Edgar notes, truth is not merely a matter of individual opinion, but a reflection of God's character. Edgar, Truth in All Its Glory. The collective's ideology represents a grotesque distortion of this understanding, leading inevitably to chaos and destruction. In conclusion, the story of the Terrorgram Collective offers a stark illustration of the consequences of a worldview that fundamentally misunderstands the nature of creation, humanity, and community. Through the lens of William Edgar's Christian cultural apologetics, we see that the collective's ideology represents a rejection of the created order, a devaluation of human life, and a disregard for the concept of community. As Christians, we are called to engage with culture in a meaningful way, shaping the cultural narrative and promoting a worldview that reflects the character of God. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Cultural Apologists React. Be sure to come back tomorrow for a new take on the day's news from the standpoint of Christian cultural apologetics.